if I forget, just be like, hey, you know, let me know. 'Cause it happens. Anyways, so real quick about me. Obviously, my name's Tanner Crook. I grew up in Star Valley, Wyoming. Most people know where that is for some reason because it's kind of like nowhere. It's a real pretty place. But anyway, so here's a picture. I grew up on a farm. Here's my dad's barn. We milked cows for many, many years. All growing up, I milked cows. My dad no longer has dairy cows, but the barn's still there. He still does beef cows. They're just a lot easier. Yeah, I miss the old milk cows. And then I went to school at BYU, Idaho. It seems like a long time ago, but that's me with Michael McLaughlin, the guy who pretty much wrote this class. We're still good friends to this day. Then I went to Oracle in Lehigh. If you guys are familiar with the area, you've probably passed it. It doesn't look anything like this now. It's crazy. I worked at Oracle in Lehigh for a spell, and then I actually moved back home to Star Valley. That's our temple, FYI. Our little tiny community has a temple, which is again another weird thing. Moved back to be closer to family. My mom was going through some stuff. We just had our first child. We wanted to be around family. I'm a big snowmobiler, so Saturdays in the winter I'm not quite as available because most of the time I'm up in places like this, and as you can imagine, there's not very good service. Love snowmobiling. It's the perfect country for it. We're kind of like in snowmobile Mecca. I've been doing it since I was probably before I was on a bike, I was on a snowmobile. So married to my wife, Taylor. We have 2 kids that are very rambunctious. So if you ever hear them in the meetings, apologies in advance. They're kind of crazy, but yeah, I'm sure a lot of you know how it is. Anyways, so CIT225. I kind of like to just kind of go over some of the basics so we don't leave anything out, because sometimes it's kind of hard to sift through a lot of information, especially when I know you all have a lot of other courses, a lot of other things going on in life. So anyways, CIT225, in the course we're going to be covering databases in general, but most specifically we're going to be kind of talking about the design of databases, how to manipulate databases, that sort of thing. To put it real simply, we're going to be learning SQL. We're going to learn how to write SQL, it stands for Structured Query Language. It's how you do database stuff. And then we're going to, and in addition to that, like I said, a big part of this is the design portion. So we will be talking a lot about design. And the whole idea is that you come out of the course with a really good idea of maybe how to design a database. And you can do it from start to finish. And I guess just as a precursor, because this class, I'm not going to say it's easy. It can be challenging at times. And we'll talk about keys here in a minute, because you can make it harder and easier depending on what we do. But there is a huge reward for all the work. In fact, so when I was at Oracle, my manager, we hired a lot of people out of BYU, Idaho. Largely because of McLaughlin's program, which is what you guys are all about to begin. Anyways, as the manager told me that he considered people who came out of this course, specifically CIT225, he knew the name of the course and everything. He said they come out with what normally the company was used to, looking at people that had 2 years of experience in the field. So it's a really good thing. And I guess just as a success story, 2 semesters ago, so spring of 2019, so not fall, but yeah, spring of 2019, there was a student. She worked at Nike in a technical writing role, I think, kind of secretarial, was in the class. And while she was in this course, she heard that there was like some work going on in the database department. And so she asked for a stretch assignment, got the stretch assignment, and has now since moved on to a new role is in the database kind of role. So yeah, so lots of cool stuff. It's a very big field right now. As you can imagine, databases don't seem quite as flashy as, um, a front end developer and that sort of thing. You're an iOS developer, obviously not as flashy, but it is super fun. It doesn't sound like it would be. It's super fun. And you'd be surprised. Almost everybody uses databases at some point. So even if you're a web developer, even if you're an iOS developer, um, even if you're just planning on being a system administrator, odds are you're going to be touching databases at some point, and this course gives you a really solid knowledge of that, and you can do a lot with it. I actually had no intentions of doing anything database related. In fact, I think when I got to BYU Idaho, because I was actually at Utah State before BYU Idaho, when I got there, I was like, I probably didn't even like think about databases. I was like, yeah, I want to program. I kind of want to do system administration. That's kind of where I was at. And then I took this course um, and really enjoyed it. And it's just led me down this path. And here I am today. So I guess a little bit more about me. I also have a master's degree in data analytics, and that's kind of a big part of what I do now. I'm a system administrator. Not a system administrator. I'm a database administrator, as well as data analyst for a school district here locally. And it's a really nice gig. It's fun. It's exciting. Do a lot of fun stuff. So, anyways, I digress. So, real quick, just a couple things I wanted to point out on the syllabus. First of all, these textbooks are here. If you are a hard textbook person, likes physical copies, that's great. I have physical copies sitting on the bookshelf right next to me. But they are provided here for free. So there's the online textbook, which is this website that we'll be using a lot. There's the big Oracle Database 12 CPL SQL programming book, and then this MySQL Workbench data modeling and development. And we will use these two books as, honestly, I probably won't mention them much, except for, occasionally I might say, if you have questions, you can Google it or go look it up in the book. I use it as a technical reference. So if I'm like, oh, how does that work again? And like on a very technical level, I'll go look it up in the book. So that's kind of what those are for. Most of our work will be done on the website. Most of the reading I recommend will be done on the website. There's also this other book called the Linux Command Line. And so in this class, the kind of big surprise to all this is you'll probably learn just as much about Linux and stuff as you will about databases, just out of pure necessity, because that's where we're going to be working. And we kind of have to work in it. I can tell you from personal experience at Oracle, everybody runs Oracle on Linux. In fact, everybody pretty much runs everything on Linux nowadays. So it's a great skill. So, I actually I'm a big Linux user. You'll notice that I'm actually using Linux right now on my home computer. Like I use Linux. This is Pop! OS. It's based on Ubuntu. So I kind of almost take it upon myself to kind of like, hopefully, if you've never been introduced to Linux, kind of give you a nice, easy intro that's applicable, because it is really nice. Linux was huge for me in my career. I was part of knowing Linux gave me a huge edge in applying for jobs and stuff. So, and then the last thing I want to point out, I guess I'll mention this real quick too, hardware requirements. Which a lot of people are finding out. CIT has this hardware requirement, 6 gigabytes of RAM, and that is because the VM takes 4. And anymore, this should be pretty standard. It's pretty rare not to have, at least I feel like 8's pretty normal nowadays. But I have seen students, so like if you don't have this and you don't have money to go buy a new computer, like please do not go get a loan to buy a computer. If you have a computer with 4 gigs of RAM, but you have an SSD, give it a shot. It's not going to be the best experience, but I have seen quite a few students make it through on 4 gigs of RAM and an SSD. It has to swap a lot. So it's not the best experience, but if it's a matter of graduating or not, let's make it work. Okay, now real quick, a couple last minute housekeeping items. The grading policy for the class I always like to talk about, because I am very much of the opinion that people make mistakes. I don't like the idea of you submit this thing and like that's it. You don't get to like fix anything or anything like that. So here's the way it works, and it's kind of so labs may be submitted late for 70% credit up to the last Friday before the week of finals. I kind of do a little spin on this, and I'll put this out there as well. I accept labs just like that. The only difference is I actually let you get up to 100% if you've turned it in before. So let's say you turn in your lab, it's got some issues. I'll grade it and give you the score that it deserves at the time, because I have to keep up my grade book. But I'll usually say, hey, like, here's what's wrong. Fix it. And because these labs stack on each other, so I think it's crazy not to fix it and give you points for it, because you have to fix it anyways. So you fix it, you turn it back in, I give you 100% when it's all good. So ultimately, as long as you're turning things in on time, you can get 100% credit for everything. Even if it's got mistakes, you just go fix it and you turn it back in. The only asterisk I will put to that is it's pretty easy to tell when someone doesn't do any work and they submit it because they procrastinated and then try, submit very little and then try to fix it. So just, I guess, don't abuse the system, because once you start abusing the system, I'll just say, you can't do that. Like, I'm not going to take this. So, and everyone knows what that line is. So, make an attempt, turn it in. If it's not all the way done, make an attempt on everything. So have it all the way done. But if it's not working quite right, don't stress about it. I can help you, because a lot of times, there's just a lot of struggling students. And so it takes just like there's that little bit of delay. And so I'm not going to dock you. I guess what I'm saying is don't worry, because I'm not going to dock you points if like you're getting 100 rows instead of 105 rows. And I am time constricted and can't help you when you needed help. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, I see nods. Perfect. And on that, I guess that is a great segue to Slack. So Slack, the reason I use Slack is because I can answer it a lot faster than like the discussion boards. Because I'm on Slack all day at work. I'm on Slack all day at home on my phone. So, and the reason why I'm a strong believer in that is because when you're an online student, the benefit of that is you work when it works for you. You guys all have lives, you all have families, you all have jobs. And the worst thing is when you sit down to do a lab, you get stuck on one little thing, you can't figure it out. And so you waste your whole time that you set aside to study or work on that project, and because you can't get help. So anyways, the idea is that, ask in the Slack before you're, banging your head against the wall and wailing and gnashing at your teeth, ask for help, because most of the time, if I'm not right there, a lot of the students have come across it, figured out a solution, found a solution on the web. It's supposed to be like this living community where everyone kind of helps each other, right? Part of the BYU Idaho learning model is to teach each other, and I feel like Slack is a big part of that. All right, and I guess just as a little bit else, just to summarize, there are no weekly quizzes. You have finals. Up until finals, all we have are our labs and like our discussion board. I say discussion board. Basically, like I'll kick out a little spiritual thought every now and again, and I don't require participation because I feel like that's kind of forced and I don't like it. So a lot of times what I do is in Slack, I actually just like say, hey, like here's a thought I had, and if we can just have general good class discussion, I give everyone points, because I feel like everyone reading that is going to benefit. You don't have to say something to reap the reward or participate. So that's where I'm at on that. Okay. I think that's all the housekeeping. So let's jump in because I know a lot of you have questions about a lot of different things and all sorts of stuff. So real quick, I know a lot of people don't have experience with virtual machines, so I'm gonna real quick talk about it. So a virtual machine is just another computer running on your computer, right? It's literally like having another monitor and a whole nother tower sitting on your desk that's running something completely different. The only difference is we're having our computer do both. That's why it's a little rigorous on it. Takes a little bit more oomph, but it's pretty normal. So anyways, a lot of you might be doing different things. VMware Workstation Player is what I'm going to be using. And it's free. You can download it for non-commercial use. You can also, through E5, get Workstation, VMware Workstation, like the full edition. And then if you're on a Mac Workstation, VMware Fusion. And if none of those work for you, or if, because I know a lot of people have trouble getting like the license and all that kind of stuff, you can also use VirtualBox. And you might have seen it on Slack already. The guide to get this working on VirtualBox. I actually used VirtualBox for a long time because they didn't have a Linux version of VMware. But they do now, which is really awesome. So I'm using VMware Workstation just to kind of be a little bit more uniform. Excuse me. Okay, so once you get this set up, which should be pretty easy, just as a, I guess, if you need to set it up, let me show you how to do that real quick. All you have to do is just go to File, open a virtual machine, or, you know, and it looks a little different in every menu. Go to your, where you put it. All right, so this is mine. And then it'll actually just let you open this .vmware VM. And then once you do that, you can just power it on. And that's where we're going to dive into here. And I've already started mine to save some time. So here's mine. And this is what it will look like. So this virtual machine is running Fedora. And the credentials are can get in. All one word, all lowercase, can get in. I'm going to show that so you can see it. So can get in. Let's unlock it. And once we are in here, real quick, I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about this kind of stuff. So this is a Linux operating system called Fedora. I believe we've talked about that enough. So I'm just going to kind of show you around a little bit. Obviously, you can see right here, you have Google Chrome is a good web browser. We have Console, which we will use a lot, and we'll talk about here in a minute. And then we have Kwrite, which is this text editor, which we will use that quite a bit as well. If you go down here to this little Fedora icon, you can click this, and this is kind of like your application menu. And the one that I will point out here is a lot of this stuff's the same, but there's this file manager. That's just like in Windows, your file browser, or Mac, whatever. And I'm going to show you a couple little neat things because we're going to use the terminal quite a bit, but there's a lot of ways you can cut a lot of that out if you're just like overwhelmed by it. So real quick, I'm going to open up a terminal because if you want to do it the Linux geek way, you can do it this way because I will do this a lot in my demos, like what we're going to do here today. So I just want to make you aware of what I'm doing so that way you're not like watching it. Anyway, so you know that it's the same thing. So a console is just the way to access the computer, and I'll use it synonymously with terminal. So if I say terminal, just know I'm talking about console. So in here, what we have is a way to manipulate our computer just with text, essentially. So right here, I did this ls command, and that's how we list a directory. And you'll notice that it's the same directories and files that we have right here. So a lot of our work is going to be done in data and then CIT225 and Oracle. Well, so if I move from home into the data directory, I can do this in my terminal as well by typing cd space data, hitting return, and then I can again do an ls to list it, and you'll notice that we are in the same place. It's kind of like an adventure game. You know, we're moving around, we're doing things. So anyways, ls, we list the directory, and now let's go into CIT225, do an ls or there, and then into Oracle. So this will kind of be our base hub. And you'll notice this, you'll learn that little file path quite a bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this, because if you're not up to want to learn all of Linux right now, that's fine. What you can do is you can actually just come here, right click inside of the white space, go to actions, and then open a terminal here. And the nice thing is it puts you there without having to go all the way manually. So that's a little shortcut, which comes in handy quite a bit. And I'll do that a lot too, just because sometimes it's easier. Okay, now I saw someone mention this, because what we're going to do now is we are going to open up SQL+, right? And SQL+ is the application we're going to be using to run our database. Basically, it's just like you think of an application like Google Chrome. This is an application, but it's all text-based, and it lets us run SQL statements. So, but I remember that someone said, hey, I can't get my SQL+ to run. And it might look something like, and it says something like Oracle not being available, something about the realm. Anyway, so real quick, I'm going to show you how to log in so you can try it. So the way we open this up is we type SQL+, and then we type our username, which is student, a /, and then our password, which for Oracle, for our database, the password and username are both student. So it's nice and easy to remember. So then we hit return, and you should see this. If you don't see this, then we need to make some changes, which are pretty easy. So let's take a look at this other website here. Oh, and that little bar gets in the way all the time. Okay, so if you run into an issue where it says Oracle's not available, first you exit out, and I guess I should say that too. If once you're logged in, to leave, because a lot of people get stuck trying to do stuff, and you know there's not really a way out of here. If you type exit, you go back to your normal thing. You go back to the bash prompt. So if I ever say SQL prompt, know that I'm talking about being inside SQL+. And then if I say bash prompt, make sure you look for this little $sign. If you can't log in, or if it doesn't open, if it says Oracle's not available, there is an easy fix. So you'll type sudo, and I'll put this, in fact, it's on a website. So I'm just going to show you real quick so we have it on video. You'll type in sudo su for switch user, and then you'll type in can get in, the Linux user password. And if you get this little hash symbol, you know it worked. That means that we are now root. We have elevated privileges. And now we're going to type in su Oracle. Basically, we're switching to the Oracle user because it has more advanced privileges on the database. Now we're going to type SQL+ / as sysdba. And now we're logged in as an elevated user. So I'm going to type in shutdown. Right now, this is just me trying to simulate what you guys are seeing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut down the database and go back here. And this is kind of what you guys would see if you had this issue. You'll see something like this, right? That's probably the exact error that I think John was having. John's still in here, I think. Yep, John's still in here. So this is probably the exact error you're seeing. So what we're going to do is go back. So again, sudo su Oracle, and then SQL plus a / with no username and password as sysdba. And you'll notice it says connected to an idle instance. Well, that's a good sign, because the easy fix is all we have to do is type startup. And then we wait for it to start up. And then when it finishes, as long as you don't see anything about errors, you're good. And then we can just type exit, exit, exit till we see student right here again. And then we know we're back in business. And then we can do SQL plus / or SQL plus student / student. And then we should be able to log in without issue. So I will post a thing about that as well, with a website that's got a bunch of fixes and that sort of thing. So don't worry about it too much right now, or you can always come back, watch this. I prefer to read instructions versus watch videos, but there is power in video. So anyways, once we're connected here, we're back in our SQL prompt. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to kind of show you Lab 1. Because the whole idea of Lab 1 is actually just to make sure that everyone's set up, connected, we're all in a working environment, because that's probably like the most important thing. So Lab 1, really all we need to do is run a couple of scripts. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means too, because that's probably where people get the most like confused. So imagine that each one of these scripts is kind of like an application in a sense. So in Lab 1, so I guess let me talk a little bit about this directory structure. So inside of our Oracle directory, you'll notice that there's a file for each one of the labs, Lab 1 through 14. And then there's this extra lib1 folder. And this lib1 folder kind of holds these utility scripts that are kind of pre-made that we will call. We'll call them frequently. But essentially, for Lab 1, we're going to run those to kind of create this foundation of a database. And then also it helps us know as an instructor that everything's working, that you're all set up and ready to learn. So if I open up Lab 1 and this apply Oracle lab1.sql file, and it's going to try and open it with the wrong thing. So this opening it in MySQL Workbench, which I don't want. I'm going to right click it, say open with kwrite. All right, now we did notice someone thinking, I can't remember who it was. Was it Sherry? Might have been Sherry. Anyway, someone in Slack asked like about this this path and how it wasn't working, which we find that this actually has an error in it, which I don't know how it managed to make it this far without being fixed, but it did. So anyways, really this kind of does everything for us. All we have to do is run this script, but we need to fix it first, because if we look at our file path here, we're in home data CIT225 Oracle Lab 1. And what it means by home is actually our home student. So let's go back in here since I clicked. If I do this command, and I'm just going to show you this to show where we're at, this is actually our path up to Oracle, and then we need to go from there. So when we look at this, we'll notice that something's missing, which we go home, student, data, CIT225, and then this skips right to lib1. Well, that doesn't exist, so what we're going to do is we're going to add Oracle here. Okay, we're going to put Oracle there. So now what this does is these two lines actually call these other two scripts. And I'm going to open those up and show those to you. So if we go here, it's lib1, and then utility, and then this cleanup oracle.sql file. And apparently I need to change that default. If you want to change that default so it doesn't open up with that, we can go to properties, File type options, say kwrite, and move that up, apply. Okay, so now it's going to open up with kwrite. And you'll notice that this is just a bunch of stuff that we don't understand right now, and that's fine. That's why it's already made for you. But just know that when we call this file, so this right here, having this line is the equivalent of copying, pasting all of this in this file right here. Okay, so when you're looking at this, just think like, oh, when I have this @ symbol, and it links to this .sql file, whatever's in this .sql file it references, it's like having pasted that there. For you web developers, it's like PHP includes, you know, it's kind of just like an easier way of copying and pasting all that code. It's way more organized, at least. So real quick, I'm actually going to run that file right here in the terminal, because I kind of want to show you this as well. Pretty much anything that's in this in these .sql files, you can actually run straight in a console. So I'm going to take and copy this, and if you right click, you can paste. Control V, Command V doesn't work inside of a Linux terminal. However, Control Shift V does. So if you need to paste using shortcuts, you can either you can do Control Shift V, or you can right click and paste. Anyway, so I'm gonna put that exact line in here, and you'll notice that it says PL SQL procedure successfully completed. That's good. That means it worked. Now I'm gonna do the same thing here, but this one is going to do a lot more. So let's see what this one does. You'll notice that this one takes a lot longer. This one does a lot more. And again, we don't need to know everything it does right now, because that's what we're going to talk about a lot next week. But what's important is if you run this, you get to the end, that it has 10 rows selected right here. And what these are tables. Excuse me, let me get a drink real quick. So I'm sure you guys have all used SQL spreadsheets before, right? I'd be a little bit nervous if you hadn't at least seen one. Anyways, a table is just like an Excel spreadsheet. It's made up of rows and columns, and that's what these are. These are tables. So imagine that each one of these are a spreadsheet, okay, that's got rows and columns. Now, right now, there's nothing in them, which, again, we'll talk about in the future, but just know that they're there. They're created for us. So anyways, that's essentially what these will do. But then it comes down here, and all it does is it just it tells you lab 1's complete. So the actual real lab 1 exercise is that we need to run this apply Oracle lab1.sql script. Now, we change these file paths, and the biggest, and it's simple, but the biggest mistake people make most of the time, myself included, you'll see me do it, I guarantee, in a lecture. Sometime I'll be going along and things won't work right. I forgot to save. If you see the little asterisk up there, you need to save. So if you forget to save, yeah, just hit the save button frequently. So now we need to run that file. So a lot of times what I do is, and I'm going to show you this just in case you're daunted by the terminal, you can actually go here in the file browser. So again, we can go to Data 225, Oracle, and let's go into Lab 1. Now I'm going to right click here, go to Actions, open terminal here, and then we're going to launch SQL+. Now to run a file, we just put the @ symbol, and sorry, I put a space. We don't want a space. So the @ symbol, and then apply Oracle lab1.sql. And spelling matters. We have to be in the same directory because we're calling it directly. Right? That's probably the other mistake I see right here at the beginning is people are like in their home directory, like they open up a new console and they just try to run this, and that file doesn't exist there. So you have to be in the same place as the file And that's why we right-clicked and did open a terminal here. But anyways, we type in @simple, we type the name of the file, we hit return, and it runs it all, and then we get this at the end that says lab 1 is complete. Now you'll notice that in our little directory here, we went from having one file to having many. And that's because that script created log files for every one of these, which is fine. The most important log file is this apply Oracle lab1.txt file. So with the exception of me saying submit a screenshot, what you'll do is every week you'll submit a .sql file and a .txt file. So for the lab, so for example, lab 1, you're going to submit the apply Oracle lab 1 and .sql and apply Oracle lab 1.txt. And there's many ways you can do this. I know a lot of people use Google Drive. So you can actually just open up Google Chrome, log into your Google Drive, move your files into there. The nice thing about that is it backs them all up too. And I guess I should have mentioned this earlier. Back up your files. Don't trust the virtual machine. Things go wrong every semester. Back up all your work, your SQL files. The nice thing is as long as you have all your SQL files, we can remake everything, right? So back up your SQL files. You can use Google Drive. If you're familiar with Git, feel free to use Git. I use Git. That sort of thing. Or you can, back them up as well, but you can also just submit, you can just open up Canvas here. So, .instructure.com. You can just log into Canvas right here and submit the files directly. But long story short, the .sql file and the .txt file, those are what you're going to submit. All right. Lab 1's pretty easy. Like I said, it sounds way more complicated than what it is. Don't worry so much about understanding too much at this point, because really, for me, especially where week 1 was super shortened, normally I try to give a little bit more of an intro, but where week 1 was so shortened, really this week's just about making sure that you're up and going, you can get into SQL Plus, and that you're ready to go. Does anyone have any questions about any of that so far? Don't be bashful. I learned this from a great friend when I was at school. He had this talent. He would sit there and I don't know I think he's the department chair. Anyways, at BYU Idaho, he taught. There was this instructor that we had the same class, and he would just ask all these great questions. And one day I was like, man, how do you come up with these questions? And he's like, oh, I just look at the assignment before the class started and come up with the questions so that I didn't have to work as hard. Anyways, basically by the end of the class, the whole solution was just pretty much given away in bits and pieces. It was really funny. He was a great, great friend. Anyways, if there's no questions, because this is kind of all that I had, and we're an hour and 10 minutes right now. Because like I said, week 1, what I just showed you is pretty much what I want you to do. If you submit those 2 files, you're good. Because all I want to do is verify that you're up and running. And if you need help, if you get stuck, let me know, because I want to get that taken care of this week. Because it's super important. Because like I said, these labs kind of stack on each other in little segments. So lab 2, 3, 4 all stack. And then labs 6 through the end, or 6 through 12 stack. So so that being said, it's super important because you can't do lab 3 without having done lab 2. So it's really important you stay up to date, and getting off to a great start is huge, because then you can actually work. So yes, all the meetings are recorded, and they will be shared. Basically what happens is I end the meeting, um, I let it render while I go eat dinner most of the time. And then I come back and I upload it to YouTube, and then it takes like 15 minutes on YouTube. So usually about 45 minutes, half hour to an hour before it's available on YouTube. And then I send those out via announcement and Slack, so you'll get the notification. Let's see, I miss getting SQL Plus to work. I'll go back, watch the video. Yeah, and I'll send you, John. I will put a post in Slack, because you won't be the only one that comes across that, guaranteed.
Can I ask a quick question about the best way you suggest working through the labs? So I started reading the description, and then I'm like, oh, I'm going to jump to the instructions to make it more clear. Then after I tried to go through the instructions, I realized I'd missed maybe some understanding from readings, like the apex, the tables and things like that. So would you suggest doing all the reading first before you even try to approach it, or any thoughts?
Yeah. So, and like I said, this week's a little different. A lot more students were proactive than I thought they would be, because we were actually told not to do anything before Wednesday. So I was like, okay, because normally, like, and someone asked a question, will the next week meeting be on Tuesday? And yes, it will be on Tuesday. I try to do it earlier in the week. I try to avoid Mondays, but I want it done early so that way you have more time to work, you know? And so most of the time I will actually tell you week to week, because surprisingly it varies. Sometimes the readings are really good, and sometimes there's like not any reading. Um, and sometimes it's better just to go through the lab and then use the reading as a resource. So um, in this case, so for week one, you'll notice that I actually didn't even touch Apex right now. Um, Feel free to skip Apex if you want. And that's what I would have told you in the week one. You can skip Apex entirely. In fact, in this image, it's unless they uploaded a new image, it was broken last semester, so we didn't touch it. And for the most part, I won't ever touch it in the lectures or in the course. And it's not really necessary to know. Um, so for this lab, what I would say for this week, I would really start. And like I said, it's short because normally I actually touch on these on a select statement and basic stuff. But we're going to do a lot of that next week. So if you want to skip all this for now, or if you get bored, feel free to read it. But as far as completing the lab, what I'm expecting is that you just complete the lab. And what I would do is jump right to these instructions. And I would go through these and just, because these ones should be pretty easy. And like I said, just worry about getting logged in and getting that file ran. Edit the file so it works, and then run it. Is the biggest thing, and that's the thing that you'll notice about the website is it's very much designed in a way to give you more than enough information. If you're the type that's curious, if you're the type that wants to fully explore everything, you will find that the website gives you ample amount of information, and that's kind of like the way I describe these videos, these weekly meetings to a lot of people is, if anything, I try to interpret the instructions for you so you can sift through what's required and what's bonus information, if that makes sense. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, that does. Thank you. And one more question. Is there an online tutor available for us to access if we need help, or?
Yes, and his name is Ronald. I've been working for him for a while. He's really good, and he will be posting an announcement in Slack probably and on Canvas probably anytime. I think they just have to go through this little thing, like a training, and then then they get access to the course. So as soon as he's ready to take requests, you'll see that announcement, and you'll see him also in our Slack answering questions and communicating there as well. So
also, sorry, I always have questions.
oh no, it's good.
In your class meetings, normally is there time for questions about a specific aspect of the lab, or is that more just information for the whole class and you'd prefer we not use that time for specific questions we might have?
No, I highly encourage it.
Okay, perfect.
Very much so. Yeah, and that's what. And if I'm ever going off, like, because I keep the chat open on my other screen, if you ever have like a question, especially like because I tend to move pretty fast, so because I try to cover as much as we can in like an hour and a half. So feel free if just to stop me. I'm watching the chat. Throw it in there. In fact, I prefer the chat a little bit because that way a lot of times I can bring the conversation back around to it. A lot of times I'll just stop and address it then. So it gives me a little freedom that way. So yes, feel free to ask questions whenever you want. It helps a lot. Everybody. The more questions the students ask, the better. In fact, I wish it was easier to do. But when I was my favorite way to learn is actually, and McLaughlin does this great on campus. He actually every week he would have a student get up and run the computer while he talked, and the students would take turns. But what's nice is that it restrained him, so he ran at a student's pace, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's a little bit harder here with the online environment, so I kind of use questions in the chat. I stop to ask every once in a while, but please, if you have a question, ask, because that's a lot of how I gauge where everybody's at. So,
okay. As far as with the final exams, is there any suggestions for what we should be doing throughout the time during the semester to prep for that, or any thoughts?
Honestly, the best way to study for the finals is with the labs. The labs are very, very all-encompassing, I guess is a good way to put them. You'll get lots of practice, and in the labs or the finals. So I'll just tell you right now, there's two finals. One's a vocabulary exam where it's like fill in the blank. So like a good example is what clause filters data in a select statement. That's a very broad one. And if you do the labs, so what I would say is use the labs as a good time to like gain a fundamental knowledge. So, and I did this with my master's because I had to learn because I was never really, I was good at retaining information but not holding it and not understanding it. So basically, as you're doing the labs, that I would recommend is not just go through the motion, but try to understand what you're doing, if that makes sense. It kind of, you'll kind of be forced to a little bit. The labs, like I said, aren't super easy, but they're not hard either. So it takes a little bit to figure out. And databases are a little tricky because they're kind of a catch-22, and that's a big struggle. I always tell people if you can make it to me to week 5, you'll feel lots better, because at first you're gonna be like, holy cow, this is a lot to take in. But don't fret. Just take in as much as you can, because come week 5, like light switches just go off for everybody, because it's like, whoa, that all of a sudden makes sense. And we're going to try something new this semester. I think I've mentioned this to a few people on the discussion boards. But anyways, I there's some kids in the local high school that have been dabbling with stuff, and so I got the idea, well, I'll just one kid wanted to know like how to start database stuff. So I started this little thing, and we're going to kind of be doing this too, because I think the one thing that's kind of missing from this course is the fundamentals. So a lot of people ask about CIT 111, and CIT 111 is great. But this class is very, the curriculum is written at a very high level. So what I'm trying to do is bring that down a little bit. And then once you understand the easier side of it, then you can understand the big side. And that's where the magic happens. Because if you can get to where you can understand Michael McLaughlin, then you know you're going places, right? So,
Yep.
so anyways, I have this website, db.tannercook.com. And this is using Postgres, which is a little different. So, but for the most part, the concepts are the same, which is really beautiful. So we're going to be using Oracle in this class. There's lots of different databases. You guys have probably all heard of MySQL. There's SQL Server by Microsoft. Postgres is a free and open source one, which is very popular. So I started writing this. In fact, I have a little thing here. There's some big ones. How to install Postgres. But basically what we're going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about this because I'm hopefully going to keep up to date on this as we go through. So if you ever want to read for understanding, maybe try this. Like I said, it's my first time like writing very much. So, but we're going to build my plan for this just in Oracle. So we're going to do a lot of scratch stuff in the lectures, which I think will actually help quite a bit, especially at the beginning, because we're going to start real simple. Because that's probably the biggest complaint I hear about this class's curriculum is that we're kind of building a big project over the term. But we never really get a chance to practice on little tiny things because we're kind of just like, oh, let's build. Just so you know, we're building a movie. Imagine building the database for Redbox, right? That's kind of what we're doing. So obviously, it's a bigger project, and so what I'm going to do in the lectures this term is we're actually going to build kind of some smaller tables, a little smaller project on the side, and hopefully that helps a little bit. Also, while I'm here, not to digress from your question, there's a CIT225 link up here, and this troubleshooting. You'll notice that there's a couple of good links here. There's this memory target not supported, and that kind of has part of what we talked about today. And then we also have reset your password if for whatever reason it gets changed or expires. So those are there as well. And you can always ask in Slack, and I'll point you there. So great questions. Did that answer your question, I guess?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Yep, no problem. All right. Any other questions? Because we are approaching the 1.5. Oh no, I guess we started at 5, right? So we're just going in an hour. Okay, I feel a little bit better now. I was like worried. I'm like, wow, this is taking a long time. I guess since we still have a little bit of time, I know that some people have to go. Feel free to go if you need to. Would anyone be interested in doing a brief intro to some of the week 1 material as far as like this stuff?
Yes.
Or is it information overload? I guess we'll do it, and if don't fret too much. Because what I usually like to do in week 1, because I remember back when I first started, I had no idea what a database. I knew a database stored data, right? But I didn't know much past that, how it worked, or anything like that. So what I like to do is give a really brief intro into kind of what it does, and I'm actually going to use my own website because the best way that I have, the best analogy, I guess, is right here. So, like I said, I often compare it to spreadsheets because that's something that people are familiar with. And they're very similar. Rows and columns is how we store data in databases. And so, but what the difference is in a spreadsheet, we're usually working with like one data set, whereas in a database, we're working with tons of data sets, tons of spreadsheets, all connected. And that's where it gets complicated. Is not only are we have tons of tables, but they're all connected. And there's actually like an actual, I'm not going to say physical, but there's an actual tie that connects the data. So my favorite way to explain the difference, because I have a lot of people that don't understand databases at work. They're like, oh, like databases are hard, and I'm just an Excel guru, and I can do anything in Excel. And there's a lot you can do in Excel, but not everything. So here's a good example. So let's say you wanted to store some people's information, such as first name, last name, and email addresses. So I know that I have like 5 email addresses, right? I'm sure you guys all have a lot too. I guarantee that you each have 2. You have a personal email and a school email. I have 3 work emails. I have this school email. I have a personal email. There's lots. And so if you're going to do this in a spreadsheet, you would have, something like this where each column is an email address. But you can see here that this gets a little messy because we only have 3 here and it gets weird, and anyways, and you're limited. So let's say I have 5 email addresses, but they only put 3 columns here, that sort of thing. Well, in databases, obviously you're going to be serving applications. You don't ever really want to miss out on any of that. So there's a good solution. So real quick, we can see 2 here. We can see Frodo Baggins, and he's got 3, and Aragorn has 2. Hopefully everyone's familiar with Lord of the Rings. So what a database does is we separate the data out and we try to organize it in a way that's more efficient, functional, and it allows for different things. So here's a good example. What we're going to do is we're going to split that table into 2 different tables. And what we have now is we have a person table and we have an email table. And you can see that we've really cut the information and divided it logically. So just like those of you who've taken programming classes, think of a table like a class or an object, right? And we organize these things logically because they make sense to our human brain, which then makes us more efficient and easier to work. So anyways, we have 2 tables, but how do we connect them together? Well, we have what's called keys. So you guys all have seen a spreadsheet, where you have the numbers on the left and the ABCD columns on the top. Well, databases work very similar, except for we get to define what those are. So like in your spreadsheet software, you can't change those, right? You can't change the 1, 2, 3 on the side. You can't change the ABCD on the top. But in databases, because we're the programmers, we can change those. And that's how everything gets referred to. Just like in Excel, if you say like, oh, I want column A1 or A2. Well, what we say instead is we want person ID 1, person ID 2, because we can create those ourselves. So then what we have, so like we split this up, person, and you'll notice this person ID here. This is called the primary key. Okay, so and what it means is it's the unique identifier for the whole table. There could never be 2 person IDs with the value of 1. And they usually just count incrementally, which we'll talk about in the future as well. So we separate our data out. We have person information and email information. You'll notice down here in the email table, we have email ID, right? And you know what? I think I have a better example of this right here. Well, let's go back here. So the different, and so we have our person ID is the primary key here, email ID is the primary key here, and then you can see that we're connecting this because like Frodo up here had Frodo at the Shire, Frodo at Ring Bears, and almost a Wraith at Rivendell.com. So the person 1 is Frodo Baggins, right? That's easy enough. So email ID 1 has a person ID 1. And the person ID is what ties the person and email table together. And you can see by doing this, we can potentially have an unlimited number of emails per person. Does that make sense to everybody, how that's kind of working out there?
Yes.
Okay. I usually take silence as a yes. The better question is, if it doesn't make sense, feel free to ask a question or just say it doesn't make sense, because we can always come back to it, which we're going to kind of wrap around to it again. So this one, I like this one because I highlighted the primary keys between the two. But here I talk a little bit more about it. So this is the same idea. We have a person and an email table, but this has a little bit more data added to it. So you can kind of imagine, what are some things that are unique to a person? Well, a name, first name, last name, a middle name, a birth date, and some other stuff. So, this says who it was created by, the date it was created. And then we have our email table with kind of the similar thing, but you can see that some things are a little different here with this data, which we will talk about this later. Don't get too stuck up on that. The biggest thing right now is to identify how these two tables tie together, which, again, it sounds like everyone got that, but this time I'm going to introduce a little bit more terminology. So again, the primary key is the unique identifier for that table. So here we have person. Person ID is the primary key. Now in email table, we have two keys. We have a primary key, right, which is the unique identifier for the email. But then we have a person ID here, and this is called the foreign key. Okay, and basically what a foreign key is a piece of data from another table that is used to tie data together. So, I mean, the way that I always understand this is, you think about a foreigner, so let's say that you're a little piece of data in this, you're a column in this table. Let's say that your email type ID or email, let's say your email address, and person ID comes in here. You're like, whoa, you don't belong here because you're not an email thing, right? Well, it kind of is, because it tells us which person that is tied to. And good data design, and this is kind of where we get into that design portion, is because how do you come up with this? How do you decide what tables you need? How do you decide primary and foreign key stuff? That all has design consequences, right? And we'll talk a lot about that in week 3. But just know that the way you design those is kind of has repercussions, and the rules of your business or the problem you're trying to solve might dictate different things. So, like, for example, in this case, we let everybody have unlimited email addresses by doing this. Well, you can do other restrictions, but we potentially have the ability to have unlimited email addresses. And so, yeah, that's why I call it foreign key, because that data is foreign to that table. And good database design means that the idea is that you don't ever want to duplicate data, right? That's like the cardinal rule of database design, is we do not ever want to duplicate data, because then we have data in two places. So, like, let's say, for example, we had first name and last name inside the email table, right? And let's say I get married and and we decide to take my wife's last name. All of a sudden, I'm Tanner Hatterley. Well, I change that on, because most of the time we're running web applications, right? Or some sort of application. We have some way to manage the data. So I change my name, boom, type it in, Tanner Hatterley is changed in the person table. Well, if we have that data duplicated, we either have to programmatically change it in the email table or do a bunch of other stuff. And it's just not efficient. You can imagine having to write code for every time data is duplicated. So a lot of what drives database design is the fact that we don't want data duplication. So if you're going to start planning a database, the first task would be to try to separate all the data you're going to store into these different compartments. So for example, like here, we have a person, we have an email. Okay, let's separate all that data out and do it. And then that's how you kind of start. The only time data should be duplicated is in the case of foreign keys. because yeah, we do have a little data duplication here. You'll notice that I have person ID of 2, and there's a person ID 2 here. That data is technically duplicated, but you know what? It's necessary. And so that's the only time that data duplication should ever really happen. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Or does it not make sense to anybody so far? Okay, so far so good. So at this point, I'm hoping that everyone could tell me what a primary key is and what a foreign key is in the context of identifying it, right? You may not know the definition, but if you saw 2 tables, you could say, oh, that's a primary key and a foreign key. Because that's actually what we're going to do next week is we're going to start building these tables. And as part of that building table, we are going to actually define how these work, because this isn't just a data here. We actually specify that this is referencing this. So for example, if I try to add a row here to email, let's say I tried to add Sherry Hansen's email here, and I put like a person ID of 10, it wouldn't let me put that in there because a person ID of 10 doesn't exist. So we build that connection so that it also keeps our data extremely clean, because you can't break the software, so to speak. But anyways, that's a little brief intro. I don't want to get too much into it. I kind of just want to give you an idea of how databases work, which I think understanding tables, understanding the data separation, and understanding the connection, the primary key, foreign key relationships is huge. I think that's kind of the foundation that's built upon everything, because actually like the real power of databases come when we go to connect all this data back together. Like per se, if your boss comes and says, I want everyone's first name, last name, and email address, right? Well, we have to write a query that ties that information back together. And there's lots of stuff we can do with that. I don't want to get too much into it, so we're going to keep this working on. Does anyone have any questions before we go? And I guess real quick, let's do one thing before we go. I am going to show you one query actually. Let's see. So I do a lot of projects all over the place, really. But what we can do is let's see a real life example of some stuff here. Let's look at cars, right? Who doesn't like cars? Cars are easy to understand. So listings, car listings, used car listings, right? So this is a real database. It's running Postgres. And I can query all these cars, these used cars that are listed on a website where you can buy, sell, and trade cars. Anyways, if I wanted to know, because in here we have this make ID and model ID. So let's say I want the URL of the car, and I want the make and model. Okay, so I have a listing table, and I have a make table. Oh, maybe I don't. Let's see what our tables are. Oh, well, again, it helps if I know what I'm doing. From make, there we go. So we have a make table, and we also have a model table. Okay, so all of a sudden you can see this, and you'll notice that in model it has a make ID, because you know you can't have a Honda CRV that's a Toyota CRV. You know, a make is attached to a model. So anyways, what we're going to do here is we are going to get a report. We're going to select, and this is where we're tying into the reading. real quick. So this talks about a select statement. And we're not going to go too much into the group by and having right now. We're just going to talk about select from, where, and order by. So I'm going to say I want to select the name from model. Okay. And there's all my model names. But let's say I want to sort that order by name. Now all of a sudden it looks like we have some messy data, but now this is sorted alphanumerically, right? You can see D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. Let's say I want to sort the other way. I can go sort by name descending. If I go back up to the top, now I'm starting at W. Okay. Now, don't worry too much about this because we cover this in week 5, actually. But most of this is just so you can kind of see the end result. So now we're going to take this another step, and we are going to connect this with make, right? So let's say we have model. We're going to select the model.name from model, and we're going to join that with make. Model.makeID is equal to make.makeID. So we have the model, the make.name. Let's get that a little bit bigger so we can see. Oh, and I goofed up because we need to put, let's sort by the make name. And let's just do it normal. So now if we run this, we can see our stuff here. Now you'll notice that this is a little bit backwards. So let's fix this. Let's take the model and let's put it behind make. And you'll notice that it's kind of hard to tell, because they both say name. So we're going to make this one say as make and this one say as model. And there we go. So now we can see all of our make and model. So like I drive a Toyota Tundra. So we could go do that. Now, you can see that scrolling through there isn't very efficient. So let's make it a little easier. So we're going to say where make.name is equal to Toyota. So there's our where clause, right? And now all of a sudden we have makes that equal Toyota. And then we could go and say, oh, I have a Tundra 4-wheel drive. Right, so as you're reading through this, if you choose to read through this, and I'd say it's pretty optional at this point, you can kind of get an idea of what they're talking about. A select statement is how we pull data back out of our database. Right, and they can be really simple. It can be as simple as select a name from make. And then we get all of our names. All right, does anyone have any questions about that? And this time, I'll be honest, we will be done after questions.
Does the tools that we have in the Linux provide that the color change when you're typing in the select statements, and will the tools that we'll be using do that?
Yes, and in fact, KWrite should as well. So in here, you'll notice that this actually does do color formatting, albeit not as good. You can always change this down here. So if it doesn't say SQL, you can change it there. But we also have SQL Developer. And I'm actually going to show you how to connect to this from your host machine if you want to do stuff like this. Because this is called dbeaver, this thing that I was using. Mm-hmm. And I can actually connect this to the virtual machine from my host computer, which is kind of nice because it usually runs a little bit easier on your host computer. But inside here, we do have Oracle SQL Developer. you can ignore this, just hit OK. And we can essentially do the same thing in here. It's just Oracle specific. So if I hit a new, let's go here. Type in student as our password. And we wait for it to load. Slowly but surely, there we go. Okay. So once we connect, you'll get this, and then we can almost do the same thing. So like I can do select everything from contact. Now we don't have anything here yet, but eventually we will. So you can do the same thing just in Oracle SQL Developer if you'd like.
Okay.
Good question. And we'll talk a lot more about this when we actually start getting more into it. Because while we'll probably hit this in week 5 more than anything. Actually, no, we'll probably hit it next week because we're going to build from scratch. So we'll probably use this next week.
So I know that in the path there was the option of either Oracle or MySQL in the file path or files.
Mm-hmm.
We're focused obviously on Oracle. Is there a lot of difference between the two? Is it like syntax or is it?
So for the most part, there's a little bit difference in the way some little things work, but for the most part, they all agree to a SQL standard. So there's 2 SQL standards: SQL 82, ANSI, SQL ANSI 82 and SQL ANSI 92, which are both standards, which means that they're uniform. Where you run into the difference is in functions. So like, for example, if I want only the year from a date, or if I want to concatenate 2 strings together, that's really where the only difference is. And yes, we will only be focusing on Oracle, and they're actually planning eventually to switch to Postgres. But the reason that they use Oracle versus like MySQL, for example, is MySQL lacks a lot of features. So they're both made by Oracle, actually. Oracle owns MySQL. They maintain it. But one's free and one's paid. So I think that's the main driver there. But Postgres is full feature packed, just like Oracle is. But the nice thing is that if you learn Oracle, the reason that they use Oracle is because that way you can learn all the features. And that way, if you do switch to MySQL, if you do get a job working with SQL Server or Postgres, you can just jump right in. And you know what? Occasionally, you might have to Google search. What's the function to concatenate 2 strings? For the most part, you'll already have an idea. But you might have to do a little bit of looking up just to see. But you'll be able to work in all of them. So I started, I obviously learned Oracle, and at the time they did both. Like you said, MySQL was on your own, and Oracle was like a group project, which they quit doing because it was a mess. So now we just learn Oracle. But what's nice is I went from Oracle, I worked at Oracle. Excuse me. When I moved, they were using SQL Server, and I could jump right in, and it didn't take me long at all just to be right back to where I was. In fact, I felt like I just jumped right in. I did plenty of interviews having only known Oracle. Like, people, as long as you know Oracle or one of the big ones, like if you know Oracle, SQL Server, or Postgres, they don't care because you're easily trainable. So, good question.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Any other questions before my throat decides to eat itself? My throat's going, sorry. Okay. So anyways, this week, again, is pretty simple, just about getting started. If you have any questions, feel free. But yeah, good luck this week. Let me know on Slack if you need anything. I'll be responding to all your discussions in the Icebreaker discussion board because I like to get to know all y'all. So Good luck this week and have a great one. Be safe.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you. Have a great rest of your week and a great weekend.